If you'll take your seats, we'll get started. You made it. How are you? Thank you for coming back.
Just said. Oh.
Recuérdate de no decirle a los estudiantes.
Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh, I like it better this way. I am so excited to host the deans and directors and professors from our schools of architecture around the state to continue the conversation that we began last year's convention. Yes. With me today is our immediate past president, Ms. Beverly Frank, AIA, who organized last year's panel. But before she comes up to introduce our deans, I'd like to share, just in case you didn't hear, how proud we are that she's received a gubernatorial appointment to the Florida Arts Council. Yes. And not only that, it was almost a year that I had to keep this secret, and it was just bubbling up. I couldn't wait. But our own Beverly Frank, our immediate past president, part of AIA Florida, applied for the Architect of the Capitol position and made it to the top 10 and went through the interview process. So I am so proud to know her as a friend and a mentor and a leader of AIA Florida. Yes. So I would like to recognize Beverly with a presidential citation for her continued efforts to bridge the gap between the profession and academia, to educate the next generation of architects, and for uniting the U.S. and Korean architects, proving that language of design is universal. You get to come take a picture with me. No. That makes it better when it's a surprise. Thank you. Here, sweetheart. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so if I can have my questions. While you introduce, I'll find my questions.
Well, that was not expected, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Rhonda. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, as I know it is with many of you from the feedback we've received from the membership. So thank you again, Rhonda, and thank you to the deans and directors who have, most of you returned this year to continue the conversation. And we also want to wish a warm welcome to our newest dean, and I will insert in here one of my mentors. I had the privilege of having Ron Delaney as a professor, and also taught with Ron at the University of South Florida, and he is now joining as the new director of the School of Architecture and Community Design at University of South Florida, Ron Delaney. Ron comes to us from the University of West Virginia and was also at Virginia Tech, so has quite a wonderful background. And also with us today, we have returning Andrew Chin, Associate AIA from Florida A&M University. Henry Roida, Associate AIA from Florida International University. Bradley Walters, AIA from the University of Florida. Dr. Rodolphe L. Khoury from the University of Miami. And again, Ron Delaney Jr., AIA from the University of South Florida. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Joseph Choma from Florida Atlantic University. So just want to thank you all, panelists, again for your time today. And this has been not only a conversation that was started last year, but continued throughout the year. So I really want to commend Rhonda and Becky, and there's even a task force for education, for all of you for continuing this very important conversation. If you have a question for today's panelists, there's a card that's been distributed on every other seat. If you don't have one, just raise your hand and someone will get you one. But please complete the cards, and it could even be in advance. We'll collect them during the course of the presentations. We'll sort through them, and we'll be able to moderate this a little bit more effectively and keep things on pace. So Rhonda, I'll turn it over to you to begin today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. And thank you all for returning and being willing to continue our conversation. So the goal for this part 2 was to take the conversation to the next level and possibly look at solutions of collaboration between the profession and the schools. We've had a couple conversations and we've come up with questions, and I've assigned them to specific people. But if you have anything to add to either one, please feel free to pipe in. I want it to be interactive. And then we will have a question, and well, actually the questions are on the cards. So Beverly, toward the end of the time, will take the cards and ask questions. Okay, so I'm going to start with Associate Director and Professor Bradley Walters from the University of Florida. And just like Beverly, Professor Walters was one of my professors at UF. So thank you for being here. Yeah. So, it is understood that the architecture education and practice of architecture has a symbiotic relationship. While AIA Florida's role is to serve its members through advocacy at state and national levels, promote professional development, and provide continuing education opportunities, AIA can also play a role in facilitating dialogues, collaboration, and as a public forum. So my question is, as an active AIA member, how do you see the role of AIA Florida, as well as our local components around the state, expanding as we continue to discover how to bridge the gap?
So I would say first, keep hiring our students. That is a critical part of the relationship that we share in the education of the next generation of architects. There are things that we can teach really well in the university, and there are things that you can teach really well in practice, and we see that as an important partnership. I think beyond that, in the short term, I would ask that you help us. Some of you know that Director Rifkin has stepped down from the University of Florida this summer. We will be searching for a new director this year. We'll also, and in the interim, we'll have Nancy Clark serving to guide the school. But in addition to director, we'll be searching for 4 new tenure-track faculty to join the university, and we would like your help finding the best candidates to join our team. Beyond that, in terms of specific things that AIA Florida can do and all of you can do, I might point to 3 specific things. First, help us to identify the gaps in knowledge that you are interested in pursuing, and work with us to conduct the research to work on those issues. So research drives the University of Florida. We conduct research at a whole range of scales on all kinds of different issues. We would like to partner with you, whether it's AIA Florida as a statewide entity, whether it's individual chapters or practitioners and firms. Second, we would like to invite you to join us in our studios and classrooms. We have facilities in Gainesville, in Orlando, and Jacksonville, as well as Vicenza, Italy. We value the opportunity to have you help us in teaching students. And so I'd invite all of you to let us know, are there classes that you might be able to join us for, whether those are individual lectures, whether those are reviews at the end of semester or midpoint of semesters, whether those are in person at one of our locations or online. So please reach out to us and let us know if you are interested in that. And finally, the last point I would make is continuing to push outreach and advocacy, which I know is a central mission of AIA Florida, but I would just like to underscore that because before I joined the faculty at UF, before I was a licensed architect, before I even went to college, the AIA had impacted my education. And in particular, when I went on college tours, I found 2, 3-page or trifold brochures that introduced me to the practice of architecture and the paths to licensure. And those 2 trifold brochures were created by the AIA. So before any university had put their kind of spin on it, it was the AIA that had given me the kind of roadmap. And beyond that, it was the AIA 35 years ago that gave me the first scholarship that I used to go to the university. And that was the prize from a drafting competition that was sponsored by AIA Treasure Coast, and an award that was issued by Tony Donadio at the time. So I would just like to say, I think that there are opportunities in research, in teaching, in outreach, and service at a range of scales, a range of locations. We would like to tighten the partnerships that we have and build on them with all of you.
That is great. That's great. Does anybody else like to elaborate on that question? Okay. I still have lots of questions, so we're good. Yes. So Dean Andrew Chin from the School of Architecture and Engineering Technology at FAMU. NCARB recently released a statement endorsing multiple pathways to licensure. In a recent article, Mr. John Baker, current NCARB president, reflected on his pathway to licensure and how regulation should adapt to make the profession more accessible. He was quoted, "As NCARB president, my biggest priority is to support this effort and increase the number of jurisdictions that provide multiple pathways to becoming an architect, thereby increasing access to licensure for groups traditionally left behind." The state of California, Mr. Baker's state of licensure, is one of 17 of 55 jurisdictions that will grant license to architects without a degree from a NAB-accredited program, if the student has sufficient levels of experience. So my question is, as dean of one of the NAB-accredited programs in the state, do you see this development as a cause for concern, and how do you see this impacting your program and the future of practice?
Is it a cause for concern? Yes. Generally, I feel the reduction of education requirements, while it's intended to increase access and be more inclusive, I don't think it's worth the cost to the discipline. Whether your academic experience was a 4+2, a 5-year bachelor's, or a 3.5-year master's, I think everyone in this room would say you began as an architecture student in design studio seeing certain things, and after that experience, you see things differently. Okay, that experience is intended to make you see things differently. Yeah, you need time to grow up. Yeah, you sleep through a couple classes. You got your favorites. But it's intended to help you see things differently, okay? I think the whole discussion about reducing and removing education, it really, I just want to make 2 points. One, it's part of a larger discussion about the really attitude about devaluing college education. Okay, devaluing college education, moving to micro credentialing. That's part of, and not funding public schools. That's one soapbox. But the other thing is that it assumes that there isn't access. The state of Florida has affordable and accessible education. Every one of us sitting up here, once upon a time, the discussion was, hey, are we going to have community college transfers, 2+2 programs? Let me tell you something. Right now, we got high school kids, not just coming in with an AA degree, coming in with their AA degree in architecture. High school kids coming with the AA degree in architecture. It didn't cost them a nickel because it's free when you're in high school, right? And the state requirement of Common Course numbering means we have to accept the credits. So we got high school kids finishing the 2 years for free. We have Florida, Texas, and California have incredible community college network systems that other states don't have. And guess what? We have Florida Shines. Florida Shines, kids can get on there and find all kinds of architecture classes offered online at our schools. We pivoted and our 5-year bachelor's is online. The state of Florida education is affordable, accredited, and accessible. You can be in, I don't want, we were Hitchcock, I was gonna say certain places, right? We were Hitchcock, Florida, and knock out a bunch of classes, okay, online. You can finish your 5-year degree. So, I think that there may be issues at other places, but many of us up here are trying to find faculty. Our enrollment is booming. There are a whole lot of kids in studio. We're looking for room. So our issue here within this state, I don't think is future enrollment of college students. Our bubble is here, and we don't have what's called the education cliff coming, okay? So, I think right now, we have 3 pieces. The degree, IDP, I'm old. I'm from the 1900s. There's the degree, there's AXP, and there's the exam. We have this very stable 3-legged stool. I don't think we solve our problems by going to a 2-legged stool. I slept through a lot of structures classes, but I think a 3-legged stool is a little bit better, okay? I think it's a concern. I don't think it's something Florida should shift to.
Thank you. Anybody like to weigh in? Anybody else?
I agree.
Ditto. Okay, so my next question goes to Chair Roida. Pretty good, huh? FIU. In the early 90s, the AIA and its collateral organizations commissioned a study entitled Building Community, A New Future for Architecture Education and Practice, published in 1996, commonly called the Boyer Report. It addressed the importance of architecture in society and called for a renewed focus on architects' public benefits. It also discussed the direction of architecture education and outlined 7 principles of action. In the second principle, diversity with dignity, one of the statements supporting this specific call for action exclaimed, "The diversity of architectural programs and the richly varied backgrounds and talents among the nation's architecture faculty are strengths that must be preserved." So my question is that you mentioned in our discussions preparing for this panel that recruiting and retaining excellent faculty has become a major concern for programs around the state. Why is this important for professionals to understand? And what is the foreseeable impact on students and the future of the architectural practice?
All right. Hello, everyone. So one thing that FIU, the school that I represent, is sort of identified is the diversity of the students, and it's sort of a representation of the city where we are, right, in Miami. But sometimes we don't see that representation in our faculty because it's difficult. It's difficult to find people that wants to dedicate their time outside of practice to academia, right? So we hire a lot of our recent graduates, right, that are committed to school. And we have great relationships with firms, local firms and companies, but it's difficult to connect. Like I see the faces of my students and I see the demographics and how do we guarantee that there is representation, that there is women in architecture, that there is diversity, that there are different angles to understand the global problems, which are identical to all of us. And that it's a struggle because the academia sort of structure is heavy into like mobility, and bringing people is a task that is sometimes painful, and then keeping them, because Miami is also a city that's very dynamic, and it's a place where people come and go, right? And connecting to the firms and the local practice is a work in progress all the time. It's something that we want to engage more people in the research that we do in the school, that we know, we believe that it's relevant and that could have better impact in the sort of configuration of the city. And sometimes we're kind of working in silos. Like it's like the city, the architecture, the growth of the city is completely disconnected to what happens in the school. And that's kind of painful to see because it's not just teaching, it's also the events that we do, the guest speakers that we bring that sometimes, it's like relevant international figures. And we don't see people from the profession in the auditorium. And we invite everybody, but it becomes kind of like a domestic activity. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be more open. When there are situations in the city, sometimes the local municipalities or government don't go to schools to ask for advice or to seek sort of studies and more analytical solutions. Sometimes it just goes directly to other sort of entities, and the schools have the body and the knowledge to provide advice and sort of engage in studies and provide solutions at the end. So we are working on those issues. I mean, we're trying to create more connections with big firms. We have had amazing experiences with Gensler. Now we're doing a new collaboration with HKS. We're working on another one with OBMI. And that starts to connect with other sort of players, but it's difficult to have them in school connected all the time. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like visits, and people come and they participate in final reviews and invitations, but it's like quick because everybody's busy and offices have their life, and also it's people that we have hired, they have to like work over the weekends to pay for the hours that they spend in class. So that's also a little bit difficult. They can do it, once, twice, and then it's like we can't sacrifice all weekends because of that. So, but if we can figure out a way to work more together, like maybe classes that don't always have to be studio. It could be sort of environmental systems or even history that could tackle and could address local problems or problems that we have in the practice. It would be great to sort of bring that into the classroom and bring the people that we have in the university sort of participating in that. We do have 2 new hires at the school in the history, theory, criticism that are excellent scholars. And they're coming from other places. One's coming from Montreal, the other one's coming from Boston. And I would love to see them participating in sort of in urban issues in the city. Mm-hmm. And we're planning and we're trying, but that's something that I guess local firms working with adaptive reuse or preservation, we have people that can provide a lot of assets to all that research. And that's the goal.
That's the goal. So I find it interesting that you may have lack of participation with the profession in such a dynamic city as Miami. Do you in Gainesville or you in Tallahassee, which is very different from Miami, have trouble getting professionals to participate?
You have similar problems. You just have to go out of our way. We end up doing, I think, because we're in a much more rural location, we've crafted our studio partnerships where the firms pretty much sponsor the studio. And so Gensler has been a huge friend, Turner, Jacobs, Com Peterson Fox, HOK, Gresham Smith. So we've really leveraged the advisory board partners to be the studio partners in many ways and other firms. I mean, all the firms are out there, everyone's calling, wanting to know, hey, do we have graduates? And I said, sure, we have graduates, and do you want to be a studio partner? So we find that we've been able to kind of, it's a similar issue, whether it's going to be parking on campus or something else, people are just busy. So we find it's better not to try to, you invite everyone, but really just focus and say, okay, this year here are our 4 partners. And I've found that that's a great way to also build alliances for the students then to end up with summer internships. So that's what's worked for us.
We are doing the same in the sense that we are trying to build a consortium of participating firms that become regular partners for these sponsored studios, and they are all on board, and this is great for the students and the profession, because the students also get this immersive, real-world problem kind of scenario for their studio projects. So.
Do you do it via Zoom, where they teleconference in?
No, they come to it's team taught usually, because Henry, you mentioned that they're very busy, so but it works when it's the whole team, like it's the office of Perkins and Will, and they can share the responsibility. But actually, FIU goes even further, because sometimes the studio is held in the practice, which I think is very interesting also.
Yeah, I think similarly, because I think so many of the students who don't have work experience just being in the space of an office. So we actually, in one of our field trips, we identify the partner firms, and the students are in the office for a week. They just need to be in the space. It's the culture of being in the discipline that's important to them.
One of the things which we've done at FAU is not so much just having a dialogue with practices, but we've tried to get the students to have real-world clients as well. And so we've had, in the last 2 years, we've had a couple of studios that have been sponsored. One was a Google studio, or an industry-sponsored research agreement with Google, where at one point we had 8 executives from Google come to campus, including their vice president of user experience, and the students projected ideas to them. We went to their headquarters in New York. They came trips to us. And then we also, last year, we had AIDS Healthcare Foundation, where the president of AHF came to our campus, sat down and said, all right, show me possible solutions for affordable housing using adaptive reuse. And that studio was led by Jeffrey Huber, one of our faculty. And for students to have a client is really different, because then they have to learn to listen and ask questions. And so that's something we're trying to also do with kind of breaking the academic silos. Teach them to listen, teach them to ask questions, not just to talk and present. So I think that's equally as valuable as also learning from practitioners.
All right, we'll get Jeff on the questions soon. We're gonna want your side of that experience, Jeff. So, okay, Dr. Choma, you're up next. So, just as CAD drafting revolutionized the process for producing construction documents, BIM software, AI, and VR are exponentially changing the way we teach, learn, conceptualize, develop, and the format for delivery of architectural projects in school and in the professional office as well. Technology has changed the public's perspective on the value architects bring to an owner in their project. Just recently, a colleague shared that when asked what he did for a living, and upon sharing that he was an architect, was told, oh, you're a part of a dying breed. So my question is, how do you see technology impacting the architectural education, and how do you see it impacting the day-to-day architectural practice?
So I would say, first off, we're not a dying breed, but we are a changing breed, and we should always be a changing breed. And some of the conversations people have about technology, it reminds me so much of the conversations in the 60s. And I think sometimes when you look at the past, it can help us understand the future better too. But it's 1966, Cedric Price says, technology is the answer, but what was the question? And when I hear that, sometimes I think maybe he was being a little bit sarcastic with the way he was saying technology is the answer. But Really, it's like, well, what is technology, and is technology the same as innovation? And in 1964, when there was a conference at the BAC, some of the technologies presented or futures presented were literally just emulating what we already were doing. And it was essentially just trying to automate manual processes. So MIT Lincoln Lab created Sketchpad, but whether I draw by hand on a piece of paper or draw on a tablet, fundamentally I'm still thinking through the act of drawing. It's not a different way of thinking or approaching a problem. On the other hand, the Boeing company presented something drastically different. They wrote an algorithm and created rule-based geometries to create full three-dimensional geometries, full three-dimensional forms, writing an algorithm. That's a framework we never could have imagined without the computer. It's a completely different way of thinking about how to approach a problem. To me, that's really interesting. And at FAU, we're trying to actually train students to think differently with kind of getting under the hood of these technologies rather than just becoming individuals who adopt certain products. So for example, we're one of the first schools of architecture to fully integrate AI into our curriculum. And what I mean by that, it's not that every course is AI, but we're incrementally trying to teach them to think computationally. So in the first semester, students use analog computation or rule-based geometries. Some of them are drawing by hand or making models by hand and also understanding the digital interface with that. When we get into second year, students get introduced to shape grammars. So even in their theory course, they're given a floor plan by Paul Rudolph. But instead of just redrawing that floor plan or analyzing that floor plan, they have to describe it as an explicit set of rules. And as such that they can create a series of variations of that floor plan or make fakes of that building. Why is that important for AI? Well, if you feed an AI a floor plan, it sees an image. You can tell the AI that's a column, that's a door, that's a window, that's fine. But if you can describe that as an ordering logic through a set of rules, then it understands that ordering logic. Then it can start to actually collaborate with you. So it teaches students actually how to train neural networks even before they know what a neural network is. When they get into third year, they get introduced to workflow. And we do this by teaching them to environmental performance design. So as they're doing a design, they test it through solar simulation. Then they do another iteration. They test it again through solar simulation. And so it starts to become this feedback loop of doing small design experiments as a way to objectively evaluate their design. And then by the time they get into fourth year, they're able to do creative coding with creating 3D data sets, using self-organizing maps, which is a much more advanced artificial intelligence. That's basically a big grid where you can populate a series of inputs, give them different weights, and it interpolates that grid with new possibilities. And then they're even able to train the neural networks to evaluate those designs and then give you new possibilities. That's real like human-machine collaboration. And then the last part I would just say too is, for over 100 years, studios have been the same. They've been drafting tables, and then at some point drafting tables went down and computers went on top. Why is it like that? You know, that is not a space that fundamentally changes the way we think. Whether I'm sitting there or sitting at a coffee shop, it's the same thing. So instead, what we've started to do is we've transformed our studio spaces into research labs. So one of them is our Creative AI Lab, which we recently finished. It has a 180-degree screen. It has 8 Leica scanners mounted to the ceiling. It has AR, VR equipment, and it has a giant server from NVIDIA, which powers the digital physical interface. So instead of something computing for an hour, it takes seconds. And what that means is a student can take a physical model, like a fabric model, change the way it's positioned in space. It gets recorded in real time. That gets digitized to the self-organizing map. Then the AI will provide you a new possibility, goes to your goggles, and tells the student how to maybe change their design on the fly. That's real human-machine collaboration, digital physical interface. I don't know exactly what that will mean for architecture, but it's something that's going to change the way we think about how to approach those problems. And I think it's something that could potentially tackle wicked problems, like reducing the carbon footprint of how we build, or work with problems like Jeff Huber works on, like salty urbanism, or even affordable housing. And I don't know exactly what that is, but maybe one last thing I'll just say is an analog version of these kind of workflows would be an interdisciplinary collaboration. If an architect was collaborating with a material science, was collaborating with an engineer, that's basically what happens when you design with workflow with AI. You're basically deciding how you want to make that collaboration to tackle a problem. And I think that's how it's going to change practice. We'll design more workflows instead of just designing things.
Okay, so my next question, and it's not on the cards. Say I am a firm owner, and I have this complex problem, and I've got a deadline, and I've got to produce documents so that it can be built. And I have no idea what you just said. how can that firm owner begin to understand how to engage that student, that they can inform how the process goes in an architectural firm? You don't necessarily, anybody that can answer that question, because I think that may be our gap, is it not, Beverly? Yes. Yes.
The idea that students, from the time they come to the firm, need to feel like they're bringing value and vice versa.
Yes.
Students need to feel like they're bringing value, or the firm needs to feel like the student's bringing value?
As employees of a firm, need to feel like they're bringing value right away.
They're very sensitive nowadays.
Yes. First, I would say students spend a lot of time searching, gathering information about those firms prior to the career fair. Students need to make sure they know how the firms are very different from each other. And that if you're expecting, don't go over here. Don't go to McDonald's and order a pizza. You go to a certain office because you expect a certain experience. I mean, when I listen to Joseph, I'm like, kind of like Ron, but our schools are very different, but what we do agree on, I mean, I haven't drank that Choma Kool-Aid as much as, but what we do agree on is we are preparing students for tomorrow. The days of Prisma and ink on Mylar, I mean, I like to be nostalgic as everyone else, but they don't have electric erasers, and they don't got that parallel bar, 42-inch parallel bar on a door. That day's gone. We're preparing them for tomorrow because I think that's our responsibility. And that high level of digital literacy is what they can bring to your place of employment. They're not going to know how to put buildings together, but they need to be able to think and still be creative and understand the wide palette of tools that are available to them today. They have tools available today that change every week. And those tools can make offices more efficient. But I think it's still about getting them to be creative and innovative. It's just that those things in their hands and what's in their mind is different.
And can I just add one thing?
Absolutely.
It's just, what we're doing, it's definitely not perfect. We might even totally fail. But that's okay. Like, that's part of the role of a School of Architecture, is to test things to failure, experiment, try to project possible futures, try to get under the hood of those tools, and see what the possibilities might be for the profession. And that's, I think, that gap between us and practice, that's how we help shape the future of practice. If we just emulate what existing practice is, we're never going to push the boundaries of what the future might be. And I think that's why also as a School of Architecture, we see ourselves as also a design project that has to keep iterating. When we talk about changing courses, we change them, we try it, doesn't work, we change them again. But you have to keep trying to innovate and evolve, because otherwise, what's going to happen? So I don't know, I think it's I can't tell you all the answers because we don't know. We're trying to, the next generation is going to be the ones that really shape that, but we're trying to train them to think beyond like a specific tool or software, but to think differently about how to approach things through those constraints.
So should we also think as of the practice as the site of innovation? For instance, some of the most advanced technologies came from offices, like, for instance, parametric design started in wasn't it in Norman Foster's, what was it called? In its early stages, I forgot. But anyway, it was a research project in Norman Foster's office, which generated all the other parametric software that followed. So I think the key is to start to think of those two as more merged. It's not the academia and the practice out there, but actually they start to converge. And we have described some of the examples where this is happening.
Yeah, and actually, I think what you're talking about at Foster's office, if I'm not mistaken, that's when they were collaborating with a professor in mathematics at Oxford, who then found for one of their buildings that if they had two different helixes of two different frequencies, they could create panelization with diamonds. But yeah, I mean, that's again, like, it also is it wasn't just practice, they were connecting interdisciplinary with academic.
Like I know how invested you are in the the industry partnerships. This is happening also in your school.
Yeah.
So, believe it or not, I actually understood what you were talking about. Do you see that there are opportunities that not only you're teaching students, that you could introduce us to firm owners and firm project managers, that they understand it to help make that transition? And then by their understanding it, I think it would better suit their abilities to integrate that kind of knowledge into the firm.
And I think first off, I think there are firms that are already doing it as well. Maybe it's not completely the norm, but I mean, last month I was talking to a construction company in South Florida, and they told me they have over 27 neural networks that they've trained themselves. They don't know exactly what to do with all of them, but they know they got to do this. And so they're collecting data on everything with the hope that at some point they'll be able to do something with this data and leverage it in a particular way. And I would say to simply just make them aware of this idea of workflow. How would you think about a project differently if you weren't trying to come up with a solution, but come up with a framework of collaboration in some ways? And then that starts to, I think, change the way they might think about how to approach a project. So that's the way I would probably phrase it to them.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Director Ron Delaney at USF, and congratulations again on your appointment.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, I've changed the lineup because I think this discussion leads right into what question that you're going to talk about. So, because of the challenges facing our profession and communities, how do we better equip students while they're in school with knowledge and skills to become advocates for their communities, championing the cause of architecture? The Academy does a pretty good job of inspiring students, but still many of the issues unknown to them with their limited understanding of the challenges facing the practice and the profession could be better integrated in their academic education. Once students graduate and start working, many are disillusioned by the realities of practice and feel illiterate for the things they did not learn in school. Less engaging projects, the tedium of work, etc. How can we, the academics and the practitioners, better prepare and encourage students to become the advocates for change?
So I want to start with the hard-hitting stuff, right? So once students graduate and start working, many are disillusioned by the realities of practice, and they feel illiterate, right? So I think for me, I think the question is what part of the disillusionment comes from preparation for practice itself, and what part of it comes from preparation for the context in which practice occurs, right? And I think that those are maybe two ways of getting at that. So within practices, I think embedded in that question is, or I should say, I think embedded in that question is the assumption that there is a disconnection between the academy and practices of architecture. And I think the answer, as we've heard this word, the answer is better integration between the academy and practices. And we've heard of some ways that is being done. Mm-hmm. I think the academy has been working hard towards that end. So I think the answer is greater integration in the development, and I think we all have to recognize that in the development and education of architects, we're all educators. Academics are educators and practitioners are educators, right? And I think that to become more integrated, we have to have more positive, active relationships with one another. I think that that's the way that we're going to bridge that gap. And this goes back to this idea, I think, that the discussion that we just had, where in some ways the academy is pushing the discipline, and then in other ways the discipline or the practices are pressing the academies. And so, how do we then begin to open up a sort of a conversation about that and practices around that? And I certainly think that when we think about how that's being done right now, we have academic practitioners. So my colleague Michael Hoflantz is a great example of that. He just picked up, I think, some statewide awards. Congratulations, Michael. So we have folks that have a foot in each both practice and the academy. Generally, our students move back and forth, right? So the students are in the studio, in the building, or they're in practice. And I think iPal is a great development because what that begins to do is it's not so linear anymore. It almost becomes more iterative in that students are in the academy, they're in practice, they're in the academy, they're in practice, right? And they begin to bring that knowledge back and forth between those contexts. I do think that we need to have academic educators in practice settings more often. When was the last time you invited your local professor for a lunch and learn? Right now, your professor might not be able to buy the lunch, but it'd be great. It would be great to sort of have Joseph come over and break that down for you, right?
There you go. There you go.
And maybe feed Joseph some lunch. That's pretty cheap. That's pretty cheap consulting. So I do think that's important to share research and scholarship. I think, obviously, I just threw out one idea of say, a lunch and learn. I think, as has already been suggested here, in the academy, research is the thing that drives the academy. And so can our architecture faculty serve as consultants to a firm? If there's something that's particularly challenging, is it from a point of view of technology, of whether that's design technology or building technology, we've got experts in the state that might be able to help you with that, right? How do we begin to integrate them into practice? How do we begin to see the academy as a resource for practice, not just as educators of students that are going to come work for us, but as institutions that provide greater value to the firms themselves. Other opportunities, I think, I think the thing that most of us do really well is have visiting critics, right? We have a lot of practitioners come in our doors. But I think there are other things that we can do, and some of these are really simple. It's really low-hanging fruit. But I think to build relationships, we have to be in touch with each other, right? So how do we host in-person AIA meetings in our schools of architecture to have a different set of practitioners that are coming into our schools and into our doors interacting with our students? Do we rotate statewide AIA meetings throughout the schools in our state, right? So that practitioners are sort of seeing what's going on in our schools of architecture. So I think that those are some things that are sort of focused on integration that can maybe help in terms of preparing students for practice, because it starts to open up that dialogue between these worlds that seem very separate, but it begins to integrate those worlds. I've talked a lot, but I do have a part two.
No, I'm loving it, so please.
Okay. So I think on the other side of then, the other question is, so it's not just about the preparation for the practice, but the preparation for the context in which we practice, right? And I think this requires a greater influence, right? So this idea that that projects aren't very engaging, right? And we become disillusioned by that. Well, in our house, I've got a 13-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 19-year-old. And our kids say, oh, I'm bored. And we say, well, if you're bored, you might just be boring, right? So the question then is, if we're doing projects that we don't feel engaged about, well, how the heck do we get better projects, right? How do we influence that, right? Because a lot of times, and Michael and I have already talked about this over the last couple of weeks, projects come to architects and they're set, right? You either take it or leave it. Right? So how do architects begin to influence the decision-making, right? The identification of projects, the decision-making, the regulation of buildings, et cetera. So I think that that's something that we need to think about as well. So how do we influence the context? So in some ways, I think, within the academy, we tend to be very discipline-focused, right? We're interested and we're passionate about architecture. But that's not the context in which architecture works. The context in which architecture works is social, political, economic, environmental. So how do we get our students to engage in that way? And I think there are some things that I think we can do. How do we become less myopic? I think we start to integrate project programs into our studios where the student is asked, where we begin maybe with a challenge that needs to be addressed, and we start there, right? And then we figure out how architecture might begin to influence that in a positive way, for example. Rather than starting, I just think about these competitions that we do in the ACSA, right? So we have a masonry competition, we have a steel competition, we have a coat competition, right? And all of those start with materiality. They start from within the discipline, and that is huge. That's an important part of what we do. But that's a lot of times what we do is governed or regulated or enveloped in these other frameworks. And so there is a new competition this year, which is focused on an ethical issue, and I think begins to move in that direction. We certainly have thesis students who do this, right? This idea of a thesis where you take an issue and you begin to explore how architecture relates to that. But can we have kind of mini thesis, right? Where maybe it's more open to the students to explore those things as we go. So I think ultimately though, we also want to get our students out, and I think especially in pre-professional programs, we want our students, we not only educate designers, but we also want to educate design advocates, right? So not everyone that comes through our doors are going to be designers, even though that's what we focus on and that's what we emphasize. And I think especially in a pre-professional program, how do we encourage students to go out and begin to get jobs in planning offices, even as they're students, internships in planning offices or with engineers or with bankers, right? Because I think ultimately, or in city government, in county government, because again, those are a lot of times the places from which projects emerge or the things that regulate projects emerge. And so I think beginning to gain an appreciation of those mechanisms within that broader context will empower architects to be at the table when decisions about those projects are getting done. So I'll stop there. I've said more than enough, but I'll stop there and leave it at that.
No, I appreciate it because the goal is for people to have takeaways so that they have things that they are interested in and reasons to contact the schools or even have their chapters contact the school. So Professor Steve Cook, if you remember my email, I told you that I had taken liberties with I sent an email out to talk about that I wanted to start looking at the struggles the school was having and the role that AI Florida and components played and how there could be collaboration. And you sent back a couple challenges and some solutions. And I did not know if there's anything that you would like to add to what Ron has talked about.
Yeah, I think so. Wow, big group when you turn around. I was on the panel last year and had the last year as interim director. And wow, these guys really deserve a hand because of all the stuff they do. Years ago on Ed Sullivan, they had this guy that would spin plates. And he would spin all these plates, there were about 20 of them, and they're all constantly going. And I kept seeing that image as I was a director of this last year. But one thing I thought about, because I've been thinking about this question since last year that Beverly brought this up about engagement with the profession and with academia and with the academy. And what really struck me is, the problem is, as a teacher, and I've been teaching for 37 years at USF, the problem is I'm focused on if it's research, if it's teaching, if it's service, and we're sort of in our little world over here. And then there's the practice world, and you have many things going on. You have to make a living and all that. And so we have these two different worlds going on. And I said, is there any way we could make some kind of bridge in the curriculum? Well, if you know, and we're developing a new curriculum now, a 4.2 curriculum, it's very difficult to insert coursework into that curriculum because everything's tight. Everything sort of has its place. And there's a lot of things that go into changing curriculum. But I thought about a course called, we have professional practice. We actually have 2 courses in professional practice at USF. But I have a course called professional advocacy. We have a course, we teach students how to use digital media. We use how to use AutoCAD, Rhino, Revit. But why not require a course in professional advocacy? So it sort of is a gateway course when they leave the profession, they leave the academy, they begin to be introduced to architects. It's already been discussed up here on the panel. They're already doing that in some of the schools, but actually having a course that students take, and maybe at the end of that particular course, the students get together and create a colloquium of local architects and professors that meet together to talk about some of the issues that everybody's facing. So maybe it's at a more granular level. We have the state level, the level here where we're getting together and talking about bridging the gap. But what if we got together at the very small local level with professors, with local practitioners? We came together and had maybe every year, and that class maybe puts that together and creates that sort of special event where we do talk about some of these broader, deeper issues.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Becky, how am I on my time?
About 35 minutes.
That's great, because I want to bring Jeff in and talk about the work you were doing, and because you do that, you've got feet in both camps.
What about?
He forgot the question.
He forgot the question. You can remind him. You talked about the work he was doing.
They want to know more about the adaptive reuse and affordable housing with AHF and other,
And
and
then
also
how you
within your own
integrate
practice
the studio.
too, and
Well,
students.
I don't need to bore anybody with all that. You know, what we've been doing at Florida Atlantic, but it's based on a model, and this may answer the question. And I know, Rhonda, we've had that. But, you know, just like the medical profession has teaching hospitals, the legal profession has legal clinics, which always bridge the gap between students or the academic and the professionals. You know, we don't have that same model really within architecture unless it's these kind of one-off scenarios or these one-off situations. So what I'm actually would advocate is, like, is there a model, something like, I know most of our schools here have community design centers. They're organized around that. You know, Henry, you had mentioned even how to get new faculty that are from outside the region integrated into the community. You know, each one of us in our communities have wicked problems. We have issues that only which design solutions can sometimes solve, and not all the professionals in this room may have those answers because they're wicked, right? Because they take time to work through. So is there a way in which, and I guess that's what I would propose, and it's actually more of a question than an answer to you all, is like, what would you all see as some sort of potential model that could even tie the 6 programs and even maybe the 7th one that's coming down the pipeline on schools of architecture in our state around that model? Because I think that's what, you know, I've always seen, and this is why I'm interested in academia and still teaching, is because I'm able to actually, the students don't know this, and if there's any students in the room, stop listening. There's a lot more I learn from them than I probably teach them. And that's a scary proposition, but that makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that I teach urban design, landscape architecture, and architecture. And the interesting thing is I'll tell a student, design a street. And they look at me like, well, I've never designed a street before, Professor Huber. And I'm like, that's exactly why I'm asking you to design the street. Because you don't have all the baggage we usually come with as practitioners, which the academy has a lot of ability to be unfiltered, to be unreserved, or, you know, to remove that kind of regulatory landscape that we sometimes as practitioners have to. And then the flip side, I think as a practitioner, I love it because I'm also seeing that regulations. And so I think there needs to be some kind of coupling there. I don't know what the exact answer, but that's kind of where I like these things that we're working with AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which has the Healthy Housing Initiative, and they're asking our architecture students to think about how do we adaptively reuse a building. And we can look at across the entire landscape of adaptive reuse in a much quicker way over a course of a semester than I could have within our own firm, you know, and that's the kind of idea. But even, you know, a lot of firms do have R&D that happen in them, you know, and I think those are the best firms, and you guys are actually mentioning some of them. So I didn't think I was going to get thrown into this, so I'm sorry.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
So last year, we at FIU, we started in Design 5, which is the moment where we receive transfer students from community colleges, a different sort of set of rules for that studio. And we made it into a community sort of focused studio. And the project that was coordinated. It was 7 studios working in 7 different Miami-Dade County library branches, small libraries. And each faculty, each professor will go into one of these buildings with all the leadership of the libraries and the students. And the program of the interventions came from conversations between the directors, the people that use the libraries, the kids, the students, everybody. So the studio was built, actually Joseph went to one of the final reviews, was built in place. Some libraries were great buildings that needed no interventions. So it was in a way letting students discover what the needs are instead of like imposing, we have to
Programming.
fix this. And this, we have to change things. So it was all about conversations. It was all about understanding the community, understanding the city, and visiting buildings that they never visit, that sometimes they go only to vote when there is an election. The final reviews were in each one of the libraries. Most of the libraries ask for the models because they build models. I mean, they did the whole sort of curriculum that's needed, but the conversation was completely different. And then there was a final sort of review in the Miami, the main library in downtown with the directors and everybody. Like all the students were in a room like this presenting, and it was phenomenal because it was Craig Akard, who is here, was part of those reviews. It was all about understanding our city, understanding our place. And if the results were just amazing.
It sounds phenomenal. And thank you for participating. Okay. I have not forgotten you.
But by this time, actually, we have answered already.
You think so? Let's try this last one, and then we'll bring Beverly up we'll answer some audience questions. If you have a question and need a card, please raise your hand and somebody will bring one to you. You think? We don't need any more? Okay. So, returning to the 7 principles of action called for in the Boyer Report, the 6th principle, a unified profession, calls for a sustained action between the academy and the profession, recommending among several other means for mutual enrichment that schools, practitioners, and architectural organizations collaborate to increase the availability, information, and incentives for students to gain work experience during school. How does your program engage with the professional practice? Yes, sir? You have a question? No, you ready?
Yes, this is, we've covered this.
I know, but there's no.
all
right. I want you to, it's the second part that's important here. You ready?
Yes.
Is practical experience built into your curriculum, and does it prepare students to compete in the global market?
Right. I mean, you've heard that this is the area where there's a lot of innovation. Really, there's a lot happening, a lot of action, and there is an integration, a convergence. For instance, when Henry's students go to, I think, Bermejo's office for...
With Jaime, yeah.
Yes, the studio is in the office, and they work on projects that are related to the practice. Is that an internship, or is it a studio? I mean, we are starting to blur these boundaries. Your students working with Google, they have a client. Is this a kind of a practicum, and this is professional practice, basically. So there are many, many things happening, all very innovative. At the University of Miami, I can share one example, which is similar to an FIU program also. It's called PAIR, Professional Advancement Internship and Research. It's an internship program, but the students they go work for a practice. They work 20 hours a week on a professional project and 20 hours on a research projects that the practice defines. and it's supervised in collaboration with a professor at the university. So there again, we are in this ambiguous territory, both it's practice, but it's also academia. Many examples like this. Recently, for instance, we had a commission that came to the school, a feasibility study, which actually then was conducted in one of these practices that had those interns. So it was a very interesting precedent where a research commission that came to the university actually was developed in the context of a professional practice with professors that actually bridged those two worlds. So a lot of exciting stuff going on. But I have to tell you that there is one challenge, the legal framework here is a bit challenging because we are always in a gray zone, many obstacles, conflict of interest, liabilities, intellectual property. Like for instance, this last example I described, who owns that intellectual property? Is it the university? Is it the practice? Many things to be ironed out. But there's a lot of potential here. Also, a lot of potential, it's not only for educating students to become, the talent that is recruited by the profession, but also research. You mentioned the practices that have an R&D department. Why couldn't they actually outsource those activities to the university? Exactly. And because every big project has this research element. So that you could carve out a piece of that budget and the fees from that project that goes to the university. It becomes tax deductible because it's sponsored research. And
you've thought about this.
Then I won't have to be so envious when I look at the budgets of my peers in other schools, millions of dollars of income that goes to research, but actually we have the same, but those dollars stay in the practice. But they could actually come through the university and benefit both anyway. So that
I think there's opportunities there. I don't know if you remember, it was Dan Hart visited FAMU.
AIA president.
Yes.
2 years ago.
2 years ago when he was, it was his last year. But he talked about his firm had a big department in R&D and actually offered to fund. So I think there is opportunity for that.
Right, I'm exploring this. The provost said, go for it, make it happen, let's see.
I think
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think another area too, in addition to the research, is the digital fabrication components. I mean, I think especially with small firms, startup firms that can't make that kind of investment in the technology. I mean, we've got incredible resources at USF. And so is there a way that we can begin to partner with firms in terms of that workflow, that work process as well? So that, again, some of that, now, again, it gets tricky, right? 'Cause now are you competing with private industry when you start to do these kinds of things? But yeah, I think that's another area that.
Right, another thing we tried, and this is where the competition became tricky and it makes me a bit uncomfortable also, because we said, let's actually mount an office at the school that is run by students, like completely, and they take on these pro bono professional projects. The legal aspects of that were like just insurmountable. But there was also a problematic element of the competition. Like, do we really want to do this? How do you feel? Do you want the university to be competing for projects?
I used to teach at the School of Architecture and Engineering Technology at FAMU, and while I was there, it was my understanding that there were developers that could very much afford to hire an architect, but they wanted the school to provide those services just to give them
They say,
experience.
We have a great opportunity for a student to get some incredible experience.
Yes.
I said, I'm sure you're not going to hire a brain surgeon medical student if you need brain surgery. So, people call all the time. People want free work. If they want free work, we say, well, hey, I'm sorry, we don't encourage our students or alumni to do free work. But you can contact the AIA at this number.
That is true. That is true. I was a witness to that. So one more, and then I'll turn it over to Beverly with questions. Do you either, in any of the programs, how do you address, if at all, preparing students to take the architectural registration exam?
Maybe I'll just start by saying we have an IPAL program at UF, the Integrated Path to Architectural Licensure. I think maybe you mentioned it earlier. As a part of that program in particular, we have a series of 1-credit seminars that we offer throughout the year that are helping students to kind of form cohorts. We have study materials that are available to our students as well for the ARE explicitly. And as a part of the IPAL, our students are literally taking the exam while they're still in school. That's obviously just a portion of our student body, not the whole, but the study resources are available to any of our students. And of course, we prepared them for the ARE more broadly in our integrated building technology classes, in our design studios, in our professional practice classes.
Yes, sir.
We do have an ARE class, and that's new. I mean, some of my former students here don't know, they didn't take it. But because we started teaching this class like 2 years ago. And it's been very interesting because it's a required class for the graduating students in their final semester. And we partner with Black Spectacles. And we buy a license for 6 months. And then the professor basically guides the lectures and the practices, like practice exams. And there is like an allowance, like so many people at the same time, things like that. So he manages to get all the students practicing with all the ARE exams. And it's been great. It's been incredible because the students stay engaged after graduation. And that's at this point is the assessment that we have, that they continue taking the exams because the professor has access to the records. And that's been phenomenal. This last spring, we invited the other companies, Amber Books and the other companies, to talk so that the students will know, what the differences and the benefits of each one. Because we also have, we invite the recent grads that passed the exams and get the licenses, like Malcolm was invited this year, to talk. And they say, I used this and I did that and I failed so many exams and all the realities of it. So next year we are going with Amber Books because they were like, no, we want to do it. So what did you get? How much are you paying? We're going to match that or we're going to make it better. So they're pretty open to working with schools as a recommendation to my colleagues here. It's not cheap, but it's a way to make sure that all the students go through at least that. And kill that monster that I can't do the exams. Like it's like super difficult. They practice for 16 weeks. They're like doing it and doing it and doing it the whole semester.
Have you had it in place long enough to see if it's made a difference in your pass rates?
We're improving drastically. I don't think it's direct consequence of that because we started teaching it 2 years ago only. But we hear from more people that they're taking the exams at a younger, it's kind of like closer to when they finish graduation or the school. So it's been very positive. Now we want to open it to our adjunct faculty because a lot of our adjuncts are sort of young professionals. So, I mean, we did it last year, one professor who's doing the exams this summer. We're trying to build a community that makes it more friendly to them so that it's not like something that is, like unreachable, so.
Nice, thank you. Anybody else like to add to that?
Just to mention a program that we are mounting, considering, it's at the early stages. It's a post-professional master's degree, 30 credits, that means 2 terms.
Right.
Full-time internship, the curated kinds which I just described, plus all the courses needed to prepare for the exam. So they get the hours and the preparation and a master's degree. So this is I'm surprised this is not a more popular program.
I'm not sure if people know.
It doesn't exist yet. We are.
Oh, you're working on it. There you go. Sounds good. So you're working on it. Oh, I see what you're saying. It's not popular, or in other words, it's been already in place.
Yeah, surely it should be already in place. Yes.
FAMU's instituted a 5th-year online that I think has become popular.
Yeah, I think probably for about 15 years or more, we often did allow people to take courses by commuting. We had people commute from all across the state, fly into town. But once COVID came, we realized everyone's got Zoom. Everyone from every 6th grader, every kid's got Zoom, and people are comfortable on it. So we said, if people can manage millions and million-dollar projects via Zoom and other means of contemporary communication, you're going to tell me we can't teach using those resources? Or those final classes, it's a matter of demonstrating knowledge. So we instituted, we offer the BARC closure. Now, a lot of it is primarily because my experience is I know a lot of people I went to school with finished a 4-year degree and never finished the professional degree, right? They're in practice, they're doing great things, but we saw that as a need. And I think there are different schools that are moving different ways to serve the state of Florida, whether it's other locations in the state, but for us it's provided online. And we see that as our version of iPal. So we have students, Pittsburgh, New York, all across Florida and so forth, and they're working full-time and going to school part-time.
I have a 4th-year intern that's going to sign up.
Yeah, it's just another way. I think we have a number of schools. We have similar goals. We go at it different ways and providing different kinds of opportunities for our students.
So Delaney, I wanted to tell you that I appreciated all your suggestions, but one of the ones I wanted you to know that we are doing already, we went to Fort Lauderdale. Was that your year that we did our board meeting at, what year was that? We did a board meeting at your school. Lourdes, where did she go? Yes. And there you go, there she is. And in October, Becky? Yeah.
You're coming, yeah, you're coming.
So our board meeting will be there.
We'll come to USF.
Hey. We'll take you up on that, yeah?
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Okay. So, serious, so you'll be hearing.
Yeah, I'm serious too.
Okay.
It's great to hear that you've done it. So this is the disadvantage of, having only been here since July 1.
That's all right.
I'm still learning the.
But see, that just confirms for me that it was a great idea.
Yeah.
There you go. So, Bradley Walters, you're next.
Yes. By all means, come to Florida. I might suggest scheduling us for about a year from now. I'm looking at our architecture team because we're in the middle of a huge construction project.
That's right.
It makes things a little bit loud around the building, but it's great. I'm not really complaining about that. But yes, by all means, come to Gainesville.
Excellent. So I did my master's in sustainable design at University of Florida, and Bradley Walters took our class on a field trip to Singapore and the Netherlands and Groningen. That was exciting.
It's great.
It was. Okay, so the fun part, I'm going to turn it over to Beverly with questions from the audience.
Well, it wasn't easy to speed read through these, and there are several that are very similar, but one of the things I wanted to remind everyone is one of the reasons why we did it this way as opposed to passing the microphone around was we wanted to collect these, and as part of that discussion of maintaining that collaboration and forwarding you questions that we continue to get from practice, from students, from emerging professionals, we will actually provide any questions that we don't cover. we will document and provide to the panelists and continue the dialogue. So I highly encourage everyone, fill out a card, and even if the questions are very similar, which many of them are, we'll continue that dialogue, right? So some of these are not easy, but and some of them I'm trying to combine because they're great questions and there's snippets of them for each one. And starting off with, Professor Cook talked about professional practice, and we know that business is touched on a little bit in professional practice, and also understanding that you all have certain criteria that you're trying to maintain for accreditation and requirements for course load, et cetera. But firms do not have the luxury of being able to fail and try something new all the time like universities. How do you make sure that the technological skills you teach students can be applied in offices? You can prepare for future, but you also need to prepare for the reality of the present.
Everybody's looking at you, Chalma.
And I think, so just because we're teaching students how to work with self-organizing maps where they're creating 3D data sets, where we're talking about something extremely advanced, and maybe we don't know exactly the perfect application for that in the most practical way for professional practice, it doesn't mean we shouldn't still teach that. And it doesn't mean that we're still not teaching them all the other tools that they've been exposed to in the past. They still do a comprehensive design studio where they're understanding normative construction constraints as basically poetic design opportunities. It's just like the way, when the computer existed, we didn't stop drawing by hand. We still use a pen and paper at times. So I think it's more about how we create a more plurality of dimensions and possibilities and understanding the constraints and biases of working with different tools, rather than saying, oh, we're just going to teach these to prepare them for this exact job or this exact test or this exact task. And, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think, and I think that's where, again, the role of academia versus the role of the professional practice, there should always be a little bit of a gap, because that's how we together advance the discourse. We can fail, and that's okay. We can try new things. We can project futures. And I understand in practice maybe you can't, but I don't know, even when I've talked to executives at Google, they try things and they fail, but they understand how to keep iterating quite quickly. So it's more about you really fail when you don't iterate. And so, like, if our curriculum doesn't keep iterating, we're going to be dinosaurs as a school. And the same thing happens for any kind of corporation or any kind of firm. If you resist the idea of, I've been cut off, now I'm back again. I guess it was just about time to stop there. But yeah, but basically I think we should always treat things like work in progress, and I don't think we should be fearful of the unknown. I think I said enough, yeah.
Thank you.
But in competitions?
I think we have a follow-up question to that in the audience.
We don't win all the competitions.
Because when I was in school, I thought that gap was an issue because of financial, right, for when we're going into professional practice. But if the gap is closed, we'll basically become engineers. And I don't know about you, but they're not really entertaining people. We collaborate with them on a daily basis, and they make our lives easier, yes, and they make our projects happen. But the reason in engineering education, they have that gap closed, they figured that component out, which is great for them, but I don't want to be like them. So, that's what makes architects unique. And, people think we're sexy guys. Like, we're in the movies again. You know what I'm saying? So you guys keep doing what you're doing and just keep innovating, and then we'll keep doing what we're doing. And the banter that we have behind the scenes, we just won't really publicize that. But no, I think what's going on right now, especially in our state, is special. Because I've been to many states. All the schools of architecture are cool. Like, it's nice to be there, just like the students like to be in the firms, and we're in La La Land. But that gap that Professor Choma just mentioned is critical. It should not be closed, but at the same time, it can get a little bit smaller.
Thank you. A follow-up to that has to do, again, with professional practice. And as much as architecture is a profession, it is also a business. What are you doing to educate your students about the business of architecture? And then another question that's very similar. For years, we've spoken about how the recent graduate will learn the business and marketing of architecture after graduation. Same for the construction of a project. How can all of you combine the curriculum to include more construction and business courses as part of the architectural curriculum?
So, Professor Walters.
Sure. So maybe the way I would start is in our professional practice class, we specifically engage the issues of the business of architecture. We do that by having the students plan projects, calculate billing rates for specific employees based on salaries. We look at profit margins, we look at overhead expenses. We walk through a lot of aspects of the kind of nuts and bolts of planning for a project and tracking projects over time. In professional practice, we look at things like approving applications for payment and that process and that little tiny slice of what we do, but that is a pretty important part of practice. In terms of construction and more construction classes, in our master's program, we don't have a lot of construction classes. We do make a lot of stuff at Florida. We make a lot of physical things. We make some really big messes with things like concrete and wood and steel, but we also make a lot of scale models, of course. Those are different than what the question is about. And I think we're curious and interested in other possibilities. Some of us are partnering with different construction faculty. We have a School of Building Construction in addition to the School of Architecture. And so we're creating these kind of linkages around issues of AI, around issues of robotics, but also things like next door, there are some fragments of a project we're working on in Alaska that is a partnership between faculty from both schools. And that allows a group of students to have direct kind of contact with both of those disciplines, and there are different kinds of weighting of issues. So I wouldn't say that we couldn't do more, certainly, to the question. I think these are really interesting aspects of business, of architecture, but that's how we're working on them.
So,
Go ahead, please.
I think if you look at the curricula of all the schools, you will see that, financial considerations, all of this, we have to teach this because of the NAB accreditation. Mm-hmm. Although we actually didn't meet this particular criteria. It's taught, it's there, but I recognize that still there's a culture in most of the school that does not recognize ingenuity or innovation or creativity in those areas. We don't think that this is where the students can be creative. Yep. It's a technical knowledge that they have to acquire, but we don't valorize this as the site of great ingenuity. I think we should do more with teaching and valorizing entrepreneurship. And, doing a business plan should be something creative and exciting and should be actually taught at the school.
If you asked me, well, this is what we should do, and do we trust these business and managing the firm? I'm like, nah, we ain't really doing it. We got 2 practice classes. Students dance over it a little bit. It's not happening as much as a lot of people want. But I would say I could get 15 alumni in the room asking them, what should we be doing that we're not doing? And I'll come up with 16, 18, 20 ideas. Then I'll say, okay, what should we do less? What do you want to take away for that thing you want to add? It's a 16-ounce glass, 150 credits. They want to graduate in 4, 5, 6 years. There are only so many. They have to take 60 credits of general education. We all know they got to take, 8, 10 design studios 3 days a week. There's only this much left. And I think you ask 15 people, you get 20 opinions on what should be there. So we offer architecture degrees, construction degrees, facilities management. You can leave the building, go get business. I think we have a limited amount of time with them, and I have a limited amount of time in the program. We have to make sure they clearly understand the difference between architecture, construction, versus being an engineer and being a business developer. Should we? I think that's why there are different schools up here. And all the schools have some common ground, but they vary in different ways.
So Andrew Chin, I don't know how well your peripheral vision is, but everybody was nodding their head.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. How much time do we have?
I'll just say it.
All right, it's 5:31. So that means we have no more time for questions. And my reception is starting next door. Remember, there's refreshments and 2 drink tickets, not your whole restaurant tab. So I'd like to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being willing to come and to share and answer questions and consider and help us figure out how we can collaborate and make our schools the best they can be and our graduates the best they can be, and able that we all can hire them. So one of the things Becky and I tried to do, I wanted, because I think we have great schools around the state, and I wanted to find out either of the 98,000 AIA members or all the licensed, I thought maybe just the licensed architects, how many of them went to these schools, and I thought it would be so incredible to know the impact that Florida schools have. So the information we have is not real. So I'm going to share that with you when I do have that data.
Great.
So please, let's give them a hand and thank them for coming. Thank you, Beverly, for helping. And please, the reception's next door.
Okay.
Thank